Welcome to the Experience Podcast. My name is Dennis, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the. Actually, I'm just going to let. Today I have with me.
I am a multi-dimensional being having a human experience. My name is Neil, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the mushroom Amanita muscaria. And we're going to be giving some background on the mushroom and then talking about a personal experience that I had with this mushroom. One day, it would have been yesterday, so one day prior to filming this video, I had a personal experience with the mushroom Amanita muscaria. So we'll be getting into that story, but first, before we get into that, we just want to present the mushroom, present where it grows, and kind of talk a little bit about that. So we'll get right into that. So this is a mushroom that grows in the fall. So the season for the mushroom is August to November, and it grows in Britain and Ireland as well as in the northern United States. And it actually grows in more countries than just Britain and Ireland, but that is the season that matches up with August to November in those two countries. That is a dried version of the Amanita muscaria, and you can see how it's kind of orangish yellow, and it has these very distinct white spots on the cap. And this mushroom, when it's a young mushroom, it's going to be completely white and covered in these white spots. Or actually, it won't even be spots at that point when it's young. But then as it grows and the cap gets bigger, these spots separate and become kind of symmetrical, evenly distributed across the entire cap of the mushroom. So the Amanita muscaria is a hallucinogen and must be considered poisonous. They're very attractive fungi, and they are a common sight in all kinds of woodlands, and they often appear in groups.
Like a mushroom circle.
Yes.
The ones that I found earlier this year were in a perfect circle.
Mm-hmm.
Or earlier this fall.
Sure, that's super cool. So Amanita muscaria is an introduced species in New Zealand, Tasmania, and Australia. And so it's introduced into those countries. In the U.S., Amanita muscaria is found with red coloration that occurs in Europe, as well as an orange-yellow form, as well as also there's a variation that has a yellow ringed stem and ring, and this form is very rarely seen in Britain. And the variations of the Amanita muscaria are called the fly argyrics. And the Amanita muscaria is kind of like the set mushroom that they kind of reference all of these. They're the same genus, the same family, but they're variations of the Amanita muscaria. So they call them the fly argyric mushrooms of the Amanitas.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that they call these the fly argyrics is because in Siberia, or where these mushrooms are very common, they would put the mushrooms into saucers of milk, and this milk would pull out the ibotanic acid from the mushrooms.
Wow.
And flies, drawn by the sweetness of the milk, would land on the saucer pan, and they would drink the milk, and then they would die because of the ibotanic acid.
Now, who would die? The people?
The flies.
The flies would.
So they use this as a fly control, and that is one reason that they use the name fly argyric for the mushrooms, because they use this to keep the number of flies down in the houses. There'd be less flies because they'd have these saucers of milk with the fly argyric mushrooms in them. And then the flies would be affected by the ibotanic acid in the mushrooms. So, continuing, the common name fly agaric is referencing the mushroom being used as an insecticide. We just talked about that. So let's get into the psychoactive alkaloids, the alkaloids that are present in the Amanita muscaria. And the Amanita muscaria mushrooms and the fly agarics, they can contain psychoactive chemical compounds, such as the two most common ones are mucimol, and another closely related one is ibotanic acid, as well as mucazone and muscarine, but the last two are not always in significant concentrations. These are not the same psychoactive compounds that are commonly found in liberty caps, and the psychoactive compounds that would be found in liberty caps, commonly found in Britain, also called magic mushrooms. The psychoactive compounds in those are quite different, and those would be psilocybin and bayestin. So it has different compounds than what is commonly found in magic mushrooms. Nonetheless, some people do still insist on referring to the fly agaric as a magic mushroom. So there is that.
And one reason that they may refer to it that way too is because they're always associated with Santa Claus and elves and kind of around the holiday seasons. So
Yes.
I mean, just the fact that it's associated with Santa Claus is already giving it kind of a magical air to it. So
Yes, and you brought something up that we're going to get more into later on and real soon here, but the Santa Claus aspect of it is definitely a part of the culture of the mushroom, and it's very
Sure.
well known. So the psychoactive compounds contained in the fly agarics are also toxins, but that means that this is a poisonous mushrooms, at least to a small degree. Eating dried fly agarics can cause a range of symptoms ranging from drowsiness, nausea, sweating, to distorted sights and sounds, euphoria, and dizziness. These effects are variable from person to person, but also with the amount of mushrooms that you eat and the amount of active compounds that are found inside of the mushrooms. So it's variable person to person, mushroom to mushroom, also the amount that you ingest. It is quite possible, although currently there is no documentary evidence that is conclusive, that deaths may have been caused by using Amanita muscaria as a recreational drug. What is known is the fact that the fly agaric has been known to cause severe and violent stomach upsets if it is eaten in its raw form. So there's that. So, do you know Lewis Carroll?
I don't.
So, Lewis Carroll is the author and I believe the writer of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Alice in Wonderland.
Wow.
And this character, this Lewis Carroll, and it says that he had experienced the hallucinatory effects of the Amanita muscaria. In his Alice in Wonderland adventure, there's a scene where Alice eats a part of the mushroom and she grows shorter, and then she eats a piece from the other side of the mushroom that makes her taller. And then there's a sleepy caterpillar sitting on the mushroom that speaks to Alice, and this is what he says in the movie. He says, "Who are you?" said the caterpillar, and this was not an encouragingly opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I was and when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar sternly. "Explain yourself." "I can't explain myself. I'm afraid, sir," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly," Alice replied very politely, "for I cannot understand it myself to begin with, and being so many different sizes in a day is very confusing." So that was a small excerpt from Alice in Wonderland.
Maybe these mushrooms will help pull back the veil.
There's a very, very good possibility, and we're going to talk more about that and how indigenous cultures use these. So, all right, talking about Christmas. We're very close to, it's not even Thanksgiving yet, but after Thanksgiving comes Christmas. So it's a great time to be talking about this. Father Christmas, or Santa Claus, has a red and white coat that may also be referenced to the fly agaric. Reindeers are also known to eat the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and there are reports of Siberian people seeing the drunken behavior of a reindeer that had eaten fly agarics. They slaughtered the animal in order to get the same mind-bending effects from eating its meat. So it continues to say that the chemicals are mainly concentrated in the caps of the mushrooms. And they grow in mycorrhizal associations, which means they grow like away from trees, but in association with trees. And they're in association with a range of hardwoods, a range of softwood trees, notably birches, pines, and spruce trees. So that kind of gives you kind of an overview of the mushroom. And I do want to get more into folklore and mythology of this mushroom. So originally these mushrooms were reserved for shamans or priests who served as intermediaries between the common folk and the unseen world of spirit. That was kind of what this mushroom was used for. The fly agaric mushroom may have been the earliest source of entheogens, and entheogens are hallucinogenic substances used for religious or shamanic purposes. And they have dated the use of Amanita muscaria mushrooms back possibly over 10,000 years.
Wow.
So this is a very old, it's been in the culture and in use for possibly over 10,000 years. So very, very commonly used mushroom. The Celtic Druids, Druids, thank you. They use this mushroom, but it goes to say that the care in its preparation and the ritual was paramount. And what the Celtic Druids would do was they'd purify themselves by fasting and meditating for 3 days, drinking only water. before consuming the mushroom. Amongst the Koryak people of northeastern Siberia, the ceremonial use of fly agaric involved the shaman ingesting the mushroom, after which others would drink his urine and to partake of its entheogenic effects.
Wow.
And it sounds unpleasant to modern ears, but if the shaman had been fasting, the urine would have been mainly water containing the hallucinogenic compounds.
Wow.
The body absorbs the fly agaric's hallucinogens first and then expels the toxins from the stomach. The hallucinogenic compounds then exert their influence on the body and are expelled unaltered in the urine. So that's how this was able to work, how the toxic compounds in the mushroom would be like taken out of the mushroom by the shaman's body. So he would feel the toxic effects. But the people that drank his urine would just be getting the pure mind-altering effects without having the toxins in association with it. So modern research has shown that the two active ingredients effect on the brain, the mucinol and ibotenic acid, can inhibit fear and the startle reflex. This would corroborate with theories that the ferocious Viking bear seeker warriors used fly agaric prior to going into battle, bringing on uncontrolled rage and fearlessness for which they are renowned in battle. So
I think that's really badass, like back then, that they were using things like that as tools to
sure
empower.
And it's super common. Like the mushroom use
it is super common, but not in today's world.
It isn't in today's world because it's been stigmatized and shut down by the federal government. But back in when people were connected with the land, mushroom use was as part of daily life as going and getting water.
No, I would dispute that though, as far as the federal government, because these mushrooms here you can go out and pick anywhere. So it's literally just information that's not readily available.
I agree.
So now that you're listening to this, now you know.
I agree.
This has nothing to do with the federal government.
It does, because of the fact that these mushrooms are currently in this state illegal to have in your vehicle, dried or in the fresh form. So it does have something to do with the federal government.
Okay. I didn't know.
And the reason being is that they have restrictions on certain mushrooms that have very beneficial and potentially mind altering, perspective changing, and like connecting with divine potential is what these mushrooms have.
Sure.
And like they associate these mushrooms that grow naturally from the ground with drugs, chemicals, but these are natural, but they lump them together, and that's why I said that the federal government does have something to do with this. So fly agaric has been a popular icon for midwinter and Christmas festivals in Europe for a long time. It's found on Christmas cards. Our current concept of Santa Claus can be traced back to characters in European folklore, such as pagan Scandinavian house goblin who offered protection from the malevolent spirits in return for a feast at midwinter. And the 4th century Byzantine anti-archbishop who became Saint Nicholas was renowned for his kindness to children. More recently, it has been suggested that the Siberian use of fly agaric may have played a part in the development of Santa Claus as well. And in Siberia, at midwinter festivals, the shaman would enter the yurt, and a yurt is a type of home with a hole in the top for smoke to be able to go out. And He would enter the yurt through the smoke hole and down the central supporting birch pole, the shaman would, bringing with him a bag of dried fly argaric mushrooms. After conducting his ceremonies, he would leave the same way he had come. Ordinary people would have believed that the shaman could fly himself, or with the aid of reindeer, which they also knew to have a taste for fly argaric. Santa is now dressed in the same colors as the fly argaric, carries a sack with special gifts, comes and goes via the chimney, and can fly with reindeer, and he lives in the far north. This mushroom is also a very commonly used mushroom in Mario Brothers. And when Mario eats this mushroom, he grows tall. And then once the mushroom wears off after you've been going through the game, he goes back to his normal size in the Mario Brothers game. So if you're wondering, that looks familiar, you've probably seen it from Mario Brothers. And so it's a mushroom that's so embedded and in our culture, and it's super fascinating to me.
Sometimes the mushroom itself is a lot more red, is it not? And then
There's
maybe with more
yes.
white spots on it.
There's different colors, and then those would be your fly argarics, which would be your different. There's even some white versions, and I believe even brown that are part of the fly argarics.
And the ones that I seen were white, and they had brown specks on it.
Sure.
So I think it might have been a little bit different strain.
Absolutely. So it's a familiar image in Germany as well. In Germany, it's known as the Glückspilz, the lucky mushroom. It is one of the 5 quintessential symbols of good fortune, along with the pig, the 4-leaf clover, the chimney sweep, and the horseshoes. And so it's also known in Germany. So we're going to go into mythology here some. Mythology from around the world echoes the enigma of the fly argaric. Everywhere it is seen as a semi-divine being and is oftenly associated with the mighty thunder gods and their cosmic fire. So this is going to get really interesting because this goes so far as to the Mayans in South America. So when I commonly think of the fly argaric, I think of it as more of a northern mushroom.
Right.
But according to what we're going to be getting into here, the Mayans also had a name for it. They had it associated with a certain god, and they also used it in rituals. So in India, for example, the fly argaric is sacred to Agni, the god of fire. His devotees make sacrificial offerings of fly argaric while partaking of it as a sacrament. So it's used in India. It is also said to have helped them commune with their god. In Mayan dialects, fly argaric is known as kukulaja, which also means thunder. The Lacadian Maya call it Ekiluam, which translates as the light of the earth. In parts of northern and eastern Europe, it is sometimes called raven's bread, in allusion to Woden's companions. According to the legend, the wise ravens were Woden's constant companions. They would travel on his shoulders, whispering many a secret into his ears. Woden, aka Thor, is a thunder god. He is a wild shamanic god of nature who commands the elements. He gallops across the skies on his brave steed, the 8-legged stallion, who runs swift as the wind and kicks up storm clouds of dust in his wake. As he gathers speed, foam forms at the horse's mouth and drops to the earth. Magically, each drop of foam becomes a fly agaric. According to the mythology. In Western mythology, the fly agaric represents the archetypal mushroom. Even people who know nothing about fungi recognize it at once. But depending on their heritage, people are mostly conditioned to fear all mushrooms, a condition known as mycopia. So that is a real condition. So if you fear all mushrooms, you have a condition known as mycopia. Only the flavorless varieties found on supermarket shelves are believed to be edible. That's for mycopia. This has changed a bit. Eastern Europeans who love mushrooms have brought their love of fungi with them as they have migrated around Europe. So that gives you kind of like an overview of the mushroom itself. And now I want to kind of talk about my experience with it and how I was able to even come in contact with this mushroom. And then we'll get into the experience that I personally had with it, and we'll talk about it. So I just want to begin with like where I found these mushrooms and how it even became possible that I came in contact with them. And so how this came about was we were on a job site, and I was working with a tree company at the time, and we had some time where I wasn't especially busy, and I was I was walking out to the truck, I believe, to use the restroom, and I was walking by these pine trees and like this reddish. I'm always kind of have my eyes open for mushrooms, like I'm kind of looking, and this red just caught my eye, kind of by these pine needles, and I walked over to it and I looked at them. And if you have my Snapchat, I had this on my Snapchat like a week and a half ago. And so I found these, and I found like one that was maybe about that tall. I found this one here also as well. And then I found some older varieties that were about, the caps were like that big, and they were opened up and they had very little white spots on them. So in total, I found probably like 7 mushrooms.
And they were all in a circle, kind of?
They were all in the same general area, yes.
Sure. Yeah, because the ones that I found earlier this fall, they were all in a circle.
Sure. So I picked the mushroom. First, I did not pick them right away. I still had some time on the job we were at, just because of how our setup was. So I took like 15-20 minutes and was on my phone and just was researching these mushrooms, how to identify them. And I verified and identified them correctly and made sure that I had the correct mushrooms that I thought that I had. And then once I knew that for sure, I took a knife and I carefully kind of scraped the dirt away and the stuff off of the cap, and then I harvested the mushrooms. And I harvested, I believe, like 5 of them, and I left the other 2. One was super small and one was bigger, and hopefully they'll come up next year. That's why I left some. So I now had like 5 mushrooms, and 4 of them were, I'll say 3 of them were very big, and 2 of them were like fairly small, like just before they kind of started to open up. They were just in that smaller stage. So I brought them all home and I washed them, and then I put like one of the smallest ones. So size comparison to this one, it was a little bit smaller than that one, not a lot. This one is fairly close to the size that I ate.
And you ate the whole mushroom?
Yes.
That size?
Yes, and we'll get to that. So I washed them, and then I dried 4 of them. That's one of them. And then one of them I kept fresh. I did not dry them, the one that I wanted to eat, and I put it in the fridge. And I found these maybe like on a Tuesday, and I just kept it in the fridge until a Saturday when I had the weekend. And kind of my intention for this experience was to have more of a connection with the divine, with the spirit world, and also to take a look at myself and some of the darkness within me and maybe illuminate some of that and help me to better look at that. So those were like my two intentions going into this experience. And like, so I've never eaten this mushroom before, and I knew that eating them fresh can cause stomach issues, as we've already talked about earlier in this episode. So what I did was, to eat this, I just ate a sliver. Like I cut a triangle out of the cap, very small, like that big, and I ate that, and then I waited an hour. And super fascinating thing, 15 minutes after eating this little sliver, I felt effects. And I want to give like a backstory. So right before going into the experience, I ate lunch, I did a workout, and then I ate my first piece like around 3:30. So I had an empty stomach, but I had just worked out, so my body was like wanting and craving whatever I put in.
Something to metabolize.
It wanted something to metabolize right. So when I ate this piece, it metabolized very quickly, and I felt it within 15 minutes. And what I felt was an expansion and opening of my mind. And it just felt more open and more connected. And other than that, I felt no different. There were no visual differences. My speech wasn't affected. I was able to communicate perfectly. I was able to walk perfectly. I was able to do everything perfectly as before, but now I had a perceptual openness in my mind. And so I waited an hour, and then I ate half of the mushrooms. I cut it in half, and then I ate half of it. And at that point, I really started to feel some things. And now when I began to feel it so I ate half the mushroom, and like a half hour after that is when I really began to feel this. But during the half hour, it was increasingly just building and building and building on top of each other. So like around the half hour time, I felt like very drowsy. My mind felt open, but I felt like I could walk like outside in the snow barefoot extremely calmly, go get the mail, and walk extremely calmly back inside. Like I felt super, super, super calm, so calm. And it was almost like I did feel intoxicated at this point. And what I noticed, like around the 45-minute mark after I ate the half of the mushroom, colors became brighter. I wasn't seeing shapes shifting. I wasn't seeing like distortions in what I was looking at. But what I was seeing was like when, let's say, a light would be shining on like a table or something, like just the varnish of the table with the light reflecting on it was just super bright, and it just brought it out. And,
wow.
And I noticed the brightness, the coloration. I definitely noticed the difference.
So everything was more vivid.
It was more vivid and more vibrant, but it wasn't changed other than that. It was just the color change, and I felt intoxicated. Like the best comparison I can almost compare it to is like drinking 2 alcoholic beverages. So it felt like an intoxicated state without having visual distortions.
Have you ever seen those tapestries that it has a picture of like somebody like Alice, and she's going into the forest, and there's mushrooms all around her? I've seen them online where you can buy these tapestries and posters, but it almost makes me it almost sounds as if those posters were inspired by that exact mushroom, because the picture is very, 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 very vivid. That's very fascinating.
Sure. It is probably more likely than not likely that it is inspired by the Amanita muscaria. Absolutely.
Wow.
I remember this experience continued, and so I took my first amount like around 3:30, and an hour after I ate the half of the mushroom, I ate the other half, and then I was just fully immersed in this like kind of a stupor, like I was super relaxed. I started to read a book, and it was cool because I could even read fine. I could read good, like, but I just felt so relaxed that like the book just kind of wanted to come at my face, like I was laying on my back. And then so I put the book to the side, and I was listening to music, and the music, it sounded nice, but I didn't feel, or it didn't like affect my hearing really. So the music still sounded like it had before, if that makes sense.
Sure. It didn't alter your perception of sound.
Correct. It was like it had a certain beauty to it, like just the relaxing aspect of it was just, it felt very comforting. And so far as like having a divine connection or being connected to the spirit world, I did feel like some barriers were like somewhat lowered, like to the point where it felt like a more mindful conversation with divine, with God, with whatever is. But it wasn't like super significant, like, if that makes sense. There was a noticeable difference, but it wasn't super significant difference. It was just a difference, just enough to where I could perceptually perceive it, but not enough to where I've had way more intense and connected experiences with divine than I have with this mushroom.
Sure. So, what were your thoughts were your thoughts clear at this point? Were they scattered? Were they, like, what was going on in your head at this point?
Sure.
You said you were reading a book.
Sure.
Like, how were the pages? Were the pages more vivid?
It really looked the same.
Okay.
But I do like the question about my thoughts, because with that, they did feel so not scattered at all. They didn't feel scattered.
Sure.
But so have you ever seen where if you take a light and you put a blanket over it, and like the light still shines through the blanket, but it's not as bright as it was?
Yeah.
That is kind of how my thoughts felt.
Okay.
So I still had my thoughts, and I could still talk, and I could still interact, but I felt like there was this warm, comforting blanket covering my thoughts, and I don't want to say covering, but I want to say enmeshed with my thoughts. There was this warm enmeshedness of the molecules of the mushroom that were with and in my thoughts, and it felt very calming, very warm. If anything, I would say I had fewer thoughts or slower thoughts
Okay.
because it was such a relaxing state. Like my thoughts, I would say like I had less thoughts.
Okay.
I would go as far as to say that.
Sure.
So, and then, as this was continuing, I was reading, and we're looking at maybe around 6 o'clock now, and it was completely dark out. It gets dark real early right now where I'm living at currently. And so I took 2 dab hits with this amanita mushroom, like dab THC. And so now I was experiencing THC with the amanita, and I was still super relaxed, and I fell asleep. And so I fell asleep maybe around 7. And this is something that I typically would not even recommend or anything when taking a substances. Do not go to sleep, because this is a toxic mushroom, and if you go to sleep, there's a chance that you're not going to be waking up.
Right.
So to go to sleep on this mushroom was kind of not the smartest decision on my part. But when this specific instance was happening, I want to backtrack, and then we're going to get to the sleeping part again. So throughout this entire experience, I have not had any sort of gastrointestinal issues at all. So my stomach is feeling fantastic. Like, I am amazed because everything I've read has said it's toxic, and when you eat them, you're gonna be having a stomach ache, or it's gonna affect your stomach, or you may even puke or purge or do something. But I haven't experienced any of those symptoms, and I was super grateful for it. But when I started to become sleepy, the reason that I felt so comfortable going to sleep was because I didn't have these gastrointestinal puking, vomiting. I didn't have any of that.
Sure.
So I still am under the impression that I probably had a fairly low amount of the active compounds, whatever they may have, the mucimol and the ibotanic acid. I feel like I had a fairly low amount of them.
Sure.
Just from my experience and from what I've heard other people's experiences. So I'll go back to when I was going to sleep now. And so I felt very comfortable going to sleep. And also I felt so relaxed from this mushroom that almost to the point where if I would have wanted to stay awake, I would have had to go outside and begin walking. Because if I would have just been sitting, even because I was laying down when I went to sleep, but I feel like if I would have been sitting, I would have fallen asleep in a chair. That's how relaxing this experience was.
Wow.
It amazes me to this point now still how relaxing it was. So I fell asleep, and I woke up 2 hours later, and I believe you were in a chair, you were reading a book, and you'd kind of dozed off. And I remember you asking me, you were like, how are you feeling? Or like, you asked how's the trip, or like something in that aspect. And I just remember I just woken up, and I just remember like grinning and kind of chuckling because I was still super relaxed and still in this like headspace of this mushroom. And we're now at 10 o'clock. And so from 3:30 to 10 o'clock, I was still feeling the effects of this mushroom. And that's 3:30, 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 6.5 hours approximately that I was experiencing this Amanita muscaria. And then soon after that, I know I was up some more. I believe I ate something, and then like around 11 o'clock, I went to bed, and that kind of concluded the experience. And it overall, it was a way different experience than I anticipated. But I did definitely experience effects from it. One of which was not the gastrointestinal effect, but I did feel very calm, very relaxed, very mind opened. Would you like to add something? Do you have any questions for me?
I don't.
Stay multidimensional, stay blessed, continue experiencing.
Peace.